These animals are not dinosaurs. They belong to a much older era, one that was completely wiped out in the worst cataclysm Earth has ever witnessed, an event far more apocalyptic than the asteroid impact. What exactly happened? And what was life like on Earth back then? This is the story of the Permian. 300 million years ago, Earth was still healing from an ice age. The massive coal swamps of the previous period were drying up. The climate was becoming more extreme, and strange creatures roamed the planet. Among them was Cotylorinchus, an animal weighing up to half a ton with a disproportionately tiny head. There were no mammals, no birds, no dinosaurs, and not a single flowering plant. But there was an abundance of amphibians. In the calm lagoons of what is now North America, Archaeops looked like a cross between an alligator and a salamander. It lacked the agility of modern reptiles, but its bite was unforgiving. As it emerged from the water, its moist skin gleamed beneath the sun. It depended on rivers to regulate its body temperature and lay its soft-shelled eggs. But this creature's time was already running out. Deep within those very same lagoons, Diplocalus, with its boomerang-shaped head, glided silently along the sandy bottom. Scientists still debate the function of this bizarre head shape. Was it meant to generate hydrodynamic lift, or did it serve as armor against larger predators? The truth is, in the waters of the Permian, every anatomical design was a desperate bid for survival. Yet none of these adaptations were quite as impressive as the true giant dominating the southern waters. In the tropical basins of what is now northeastern Brazil lived the largest amphibian of all time, Prionosuchus. Yes, an amphibian. Measuring several meters long, it patrolled the channels of the Pedra de Fogo formation like a phantom crocodile, even though crocodiles didn't even exist yet. It sat comfortably at the top of the aquatic food chain, a Brazilian monster that rivaled the largest crocodilians in history, despite being an amphibian. But while giant amphibians controlled the waters and seemed indestructible, the future was being written on dry land. To survive in the hostile interior of Pangaea, creatures had to cut the umbilical cord to the water. One group that stood out on dry land was the synapsids. Often incorrectly called mammal-like reptiles, they weren't actually reptiles at all. They belonged to an entirely different lineage. Dimetrodon is a synapsid that instantly catches the eye due to the massive sail on its back, which likely helped regulate its temperature or served as a display to attract mates. This synapsid is frequently mistaken for a dinosaur, though it is nothing of the sort. Its teeth were already specialized to pierce, cut, and slice through flesh. What about the plants? The forests of the Permian were gradually being forced to adapt to increasingly dry conditions. Glossopterous plants covered vast stretches of the supercontinent. Their tongue-shaped leaves fell in enormous numbers during the cold seasons, accumulating along riverbanks and forming the foundation of a complex ecosystem of insects and small herbivores. Giant insects, measuring tens of centimeters in length, still buzzed among the branches of primitive trees. Plants developed chemical and physical defenses against these attacks. And it was in this world of forests and plains that the synapsids began to diversify into highly specialized ecological roles. In the treetops, far beyond the reach of terrestrial predators, one of prehistory's most extraordinary acrobats appeared, in a region that is now part of Russia, Suminia. At first glance, it looked like an insignificant little creature. But look closer. Its hands had divergent fingers that could grip branches with precision. Suminia was one of the first vertebrates to live in trees, using its hands to strip bark from branches and gather tender leaves. 200 million years before the first monkeys appeared. And speed was not confined to the trees. On the forest floor, small creatures were already running in an entirely new way. Eudybymus was a tiny creature, but it possessed one remarkable trait. It could run upright on its two hind legs. It was one of the first creatures in Earth's history to use bipedal locomotion, gaining the speed it needed to escape from danger. While the little ones hid and ran, giants began patrolling the lake shores, and they were terrifying. In the colder regions of northern Pangaea, Asteminosuchus lumbered through the mud. As large as a bull, with bizarre bony protrusions on its head resembling antlers, it was an intimidating sight. Its skin was thick, much like that of a modern hippopotamus, and in what is now southern Brazil, its evolutionary relatives were also leaving their mark. A Brazilian dinocephalian inhabited the shores of Pangaea's vast inland lakes. It was a carnivore with a powerful skull and one of the dominant predators in its ecosystem. But this entire world was about to face a sea of fire and suffocation. The climate was changing violently, and whispers of a global catastrophe were beginning to sweep across the interior of Pangaea. In the tropical regions, the great forests began to suffer. The moisture that had once nourished the valleys began retreating toward the poles. Rivers gave way to vast plains of cracked clay. Seasonal storms still battered the land from time to time, but the water evaporated almost immediately beneath the relentless heat. Instead of fertile soil, all that remained were dry, reddish drainage channels, where only the hardiest plants managed to cling to life. Further inland, the landscape was even more drastic. Footprints left in the sand and mud dried rapidly. Each print was a silent record of animals marching in a desperate search for water, a search that, for many of them, led nowhere. The trees that once blanketed the mountains changed as well. Groves of Walchian conifers spread across the arid slopes. Their needle-shaped leaves were adapted to conserve every drop of water. But the crisis was not simply a lack of rain. Temperatures were rising out of control. What could possibly be causing all this? The first culprit was a wave of massive volcanic eruptions in what is now China. The climatic shock they triggered wiped out many marine and terrestrial species in what became known as the Capitanian Crisis. But the worst was still to come. As life struggled to adapt to this new reality, predators went in search of food. Gorgonopsids. They were the saber-toothed tigers of the Permian. With enormous canine teeth and far greater agility than ordinary reptiles, they were the nightmare of Pangaea. However, life as an apex predator in this changing world was not easy. The fossil record shows us that these animals fought violently over food and territory. Deep scars preserved in their fossilized skulls reveal a life of brutality and extreme competition on the brink of ecological collapse. While the battle for survival raged on land, the final cataclysm was brewing. Around 252 million years ago, the planet's clock stopped. What happened next was not an asteroid impact. It was something much worse. In northern Pangaea, in what is now Siberia, the Earth's crust simply tore open. A colossal fissure split the land, beginning the largest continuous outpouring of lava in the planet's history, the Siberian Traps. These were not ordinary cone-shaped volcanoes. They were immense sheets of incandescent lava that covered an area possibly as large as the United States. But the lava itself was not the main force that killed the planet. The true executioner was the coal and the gas. The molten lava forced its way through enormous deposits of coal, shale, and other underground materials. It was as though the Earth had switched on the largest power plant imaginable, all at once. Billions of tons of carbon dioxide, methane, and toxic gases were pumped into the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect was swift and devastating. Global temperatures rose by 10 degrees Celsius in what was, geologically speaking, an instant. Rain became as acidic as vinegar, scorching the forests that remained. And in the oceans, the tragedy was silent and absolute. As water temperatures rose, oxygen disappeared. Ocean currents ground to a halt. The ocean became a stagnant, toxic pool where hydrogen sulfide-producing bacteria began to thrive, tinting the water purple and releasing deadly gas into the atmosphere. Entire forests of sponges and crinoids, which had once sheltered thousands of species, became limestone graveyards. Brachiopods, shelled animals that had dominated the seas for hundreds of millions of years, died in enormous numbers, unable to breathe in the acidic, oxygen-starved water. The once vibrant tropical reefs collapsed, and in the middle of this underwater wasteland came one of the saddest farewells in the history of the Earth. Trilobites had survived 2 previous great mass extinctions and countless smaller crises over roughly 270 million years. They had watched continents collide and drift apart. But in the hot, acidic waters of the late Permian, the last trilobite drew its final breath. Even a creature that had seemed unbeatable after such an extraordinary biological dynasty met its end in the ocean's toxic mud. More than 80% of all marine species went extinct. 70% of terrestrial vertebrates vanished from the face of the Earth. It was the Great Permian Extinction, the largest known mass extinction in Earth's history. The day life on Earth almost ended. When the ashes finally settled and the Siberian lava cooled, the Earth was little more than a silent graveyard. But in the silence of that ashen wasteland, beneath the cracked ground, something moved. A small cynodont opened its eyes, and there were others like it. From that small group of survivors, new lineages would emerge, until one of them, in the distant future, gave rise to the first mammals. Somehow, part of our own story was still alive, but the Triassic period was only just beginning. The world had been cleared, like a game board waiting for new pieces. And in the power vacuum left by the annihilation of the ancient kings of the Permian, a new group of creatures began to rise and claim the throne. See you in the next episode.